criminal ledger frozen in time for over 6 decades, was finally forced to yield its darkest page. Authorities announced a historic breakthrough in one of the state's oldest cold case murders. But the true turning point in the investigation had taken place 3 years earlier, inside a frozen FedEx distribution hub paralyzed by a historic winter storm. In the depths of 2023, a federal agent conducted a near-impossible search through millions of stranded packages for a single insulated container. Inside it lay a microscopic DNA sample, just 0.4 nanograms, recovered from the clothing of a 12-year-old girl murdered in 1964. This is Fog Dossier. To comprehend the true weight of this tragedy, one must travel back to the bleak opening months of 1964 to a house at 410 North Main Street, Elmira. There lived 12-year-old Mary Theresa Simpson. To the local community, Mary was an active, bright child. She was a dedicated member of the Girl Scouts, a familiar face at the neighborhood house, the YWCA, and the Volunteers of America. On a shelf at home sat a small cooking trophy, one of her most cherished possessions. Yet away from her structured routines, Mary was remarkably shy, quiet, and deeply cautious. Her mother, Rose T. Simpson, described her as a girl who kept strict boundaries. Mary was simply not the sort to approach strangers, let alone climb into an unfamiliar vehicle, unless subjected to sheer brute force. Mary's domestic life was shadowed by complicated family dynamics. Since May 1963, her parents had been separated. Mary lived with her father, Ellsworth Simpson, who doted on his youngest daughter with protective devotion. He had recently bought her a smart new dress and a pair of crisp white sneakers that she wore with immense pride. Her mother lived entirely separately, occupying a modest 3-room flat at the back of 320 DeWitt Avenue. Due to the estrangement, Mary was only permitted to visit her mother once a month, brief, precious hours that both clung to desperately. Her older brother, Tommy, 18, was confined to Newark State Hospital due to severe cerebral palsy, unaware of the storm gathering around his little sister. Her older sister, Linda Rose, lived at St. Anne's home in Rochester. In the quiet rooms of the Main Street house, Mary was her father's anchor. Yet, neither man nor child foresaw that the very first time Mary was permitted to walk across town entirely unaccompanied would also be her last. Sunday, the 15th of March, 1964. At approximately 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Mary stepped out of her father's house, dressed in her new clothing and clean white sneakers. That afternoon was a milestone. For the first time in her life, she was walking across Elmira alone to see her mother. In Rose's small flat on DeWitt Avenue, Mary spent a fleeting, happy hour. It was an ordinary Sunday scene. In the corner of the room, Chubby, a small black and tan puppy, offered the occasional soft bark as neighbors moved down the building's rear hallway. Before Mary bade farewell, her mother reiterated her father's unyielding instruction. Mary was under a strict curfew to be through the front door by 6 o'clock sharp. Mary nodded, departing for her grandparents' residence at 182 Sierre Street to play briefly with her cousins. Time, however, slipped away. By the time she prepared to head home, the clock read 6:30. She was already late. Noting the gathering dusk, her aunt, Alice Bauman, along with her 2 daughters, decided to escort Mary through the chilly Elmira twilight. Their footsteps and quiet chatter accompanied Mary as far as the junction of East Market Street and Harriet Street. At that darkening corner, Mary waved goodbye to her aunt and cousins. The street lamps were flickering to life, one by one, as Mary's small silhouette turned onto the pavement to finish the final stretch home alone. That was the exact moment Mary Theresa Simpson vanished from the face of the earth. By 10 to 11 that night, Panic had completely overtaken the house on North Main Street. Realizing his daughter was long overdue, a frantic Ellsworth Simpson hurried to the police station to report her missing. That very night, the peace of Elmira was shattered. Officers combed through the dark, freezing corners of the town, checking derelict buildings, abandoned yards, rubbish tips, and quiet used car lots. Elmira, however, remained obstinately silent. 4 days later, on Thursday, the 19th of March 1964, at 25 to 5 in the afternoon, the search ended in unmitigated horror. In a densely wooded patch of Southport, near Combs Hill Road, a rutted, desolate hillside track, flanked by barren, frozen brambles, a man hiking with his 2 young sons halted in his tracks. Jutting out from a bleak pile of dead leaves was the unmistakable white sole of a child's sneaker. There, 5 miles from her home, Mary's body was discovered. She was fully clothed, but her remains had been deliberately concealed beneath soil, brushwood, and 4 massive fieldstones, the largest of which weighed over 100 pounds. In a display of singular cruelty, the child's mouth and throat had been packed tight with dirt and twigs. The post-mortem confirmed she had been subjected to a brutal sexual assault before dying of asphyxiation due to manual strangulation. Sifting through the frozen mud, detectives gathered the scattered fragments of a stolen childhood. A pair of thick, plastic cat-eye spectacles, caked in dust, and a yellowed card tucked inside her bag. Membership number 18,656 for the Jungle J fan club, made out to Mary T. Simpson. These innocent artifacts were booked into evidence alongside plaster casts of tire tracks and boot prints lifted from the Southport mire. The news of Mary's murder struck Elmira like a physical blow. When the casket was brought to the family home, her 16-year-old sister, Linda Rose, collapsed into a state of hysterical trauma, attempting to fling herself into the coffin to go with her sister. A massive manhunt swung into motion. By October 1964, over 300 suspects had been systematically rounded up and interrogated.
Local radio station WELM and the Star-Gazette newspaper raised a $1,000 reward, a sum that crept up to $5,000 by 1972. Yet, every lead withered. The case went stone cold. The original detectives retired, grew old, and went to their graves never knowing the identity of the monster they had hunted. But inside the Elmira evidence room, a small swatch of fabric cut from Mary's skirt, catalogued simply as Item 7A, was meticulously preserved. Containing a dried semen stain, it sat in the dark for decades, long before the double helix of DNA was ever envisioned as an investigative weapon. 39 years later, in February 2003, Mary's clothing was transferred to the New York State Police Forensic Investigation Center. In April 2003, scientists successfully harvested a genetic profile, known as an STR profile, from Item 7A and uploaded it to CODIS, the National Criminal Database. The system returned nothing. 11 years later, in November 2014, detectives tried again, extracting a YSTR profile to map the suspect's paternal lineage. Once more, CODIS flatlined. Mary's killer had no state or federal criminal record on file. The case was locked back into the archives. The modern genesis of the investigation arrived in 2022. Sergeant William Goodwin of the Elmira Police Department secured a specialist grant from the non-profit organization Season of Justice to pursue investigative genetic genealogy, or IGG. The remaining biological sample on Item 7A was at an absolute crisis point. A mere 0.4 nanograms remained. FBI Special Agent Kenneth Jensen packed the microscopic speck in dry ice, routing it to the specialist laboratories of Othram Incorporated in Texas. It was during this journey, in the winter of 2023, that disaster struck. A historic ice storm paralyzed the Memphis FedEx distribution hub, trapping millions of packages inside the frozen facility. If the dry ice sublimated before the shipment reached Texas, the DNA would degrade permanently into uselessness. Communication with the facility collapsed under the weight of the storm. In a desperate bid, Jensen contacted FBI personnel stationed locally in Tennessee. An FBI liaison entered the crippled facility, executing a grueling manual search through mountains of stranded freight for the missing evidence container. The sample was recovered moments before the dry ice completely vanished, transferred immediately into local cold storage until the transport routes reopened. By 2024, Othram's technicians successfully extracted a comprehensive digital blueprint, an SMP profile, from the historic sample. This advanced blueprint was uploaded into public genealogical databases to seek out familial matches. Throughout 2024 and into the middle of 2025, a joint task force comprising Elmira detectives, the FBI's Corning office, and the New York State Police worked in total secrecy. They were no longer pounding the pavement, they were building an intricate, multi-generational family tree of a ghost. Distant cousin matches were analyzed, historical records cross-referenced, until the branches narrowed inexorably toward a single line of descent. Detectives identified a living man in the area who sat on the direct branch of the suspect. Officers secured a lawful buccal mouth swab from him. In June 2025, the forensic lab issued the definitive match. The donor of the semen on item 7A was, beyond any biological doubt, the paternal father of the man who had provided the mouth swab. The faceless killer of 1964 finally had a name: Alfred Murray Jr. Military records revealed Murray was a US Army veteran who had served in the Korean War before returning to Elmira to spend his life working as an ordinary truck driver, marrying and raising children and grandchildren. Though he possessed a prior dark record for child molestation, including the abuse of 2 7-year-old sisters when he was a teenager, his name had never once entered the thick ledger of suspects during the 1964 investigation. The revelation left researchers stunned. Author Christina Finelli, who had spent a year conducting exhaustive archival research for her book on the Simpson cold case, admitted Murray had never even blinked on her radar. For 60 years, the community had been poisoned by whispers pointing toward family acquaintances or, cruelly, Mary's own father. Forensic science cleared the fog. It was a brutal crime of opportunity. Murray did not know the child. The haunting words of her mother, Rose, from that 1964 newspaper clipping, finally echoed with terrifying clarity. She would never get into a car unless she was forced. Yet human justice had been outrun. Alfred Murray Jr. had died of natural causes in March 2004, aged 73, exactly 40 years to the month after Mary Theresa Simpson vanished. He had slipped into an Elmira grave, entirely convinced his secret was buried with him. But the police refused to let the ledger close on an unverified theory. In November 2025, armed with a Supreme Court order from Chemung County, heavy machinery rolled into the Elmira cemetery. Alfred Murray's grave was exhumed. Standing in the freezing morning air, silver-haired retired detectives who had spent their youth chasing a phantom stood frozen as the killer's coffin was cranked to the surface to yield a final bone sample. 3 months of rigorous laboratory validation followed. On the 10th of February 2026, Elmira Police Chief Kristen Thorne stood before the press to close the book for good. The DNA from Murray's bones was an unassailable match to item 7A, with a mathematical certainty of 1 in 320 billion. It stood officially as the oldest cold case murder ever solved by DNA in the history of New York State. In that same room sat 78-year-old Linda Galpin. 62 years prior, she was the heartbroken 16-year-old girl screaming to go into the earth with her little sister. Now, in the twilight of her life, she watched the file close with absolute finality.
And I want to thank the police department and everybody who was involved in it. I am very happy it's finally introduced my mom was here. But thank you very much, and I'm glad it's all finally settled after almost 62 years. That's all I have to say, but thank everybody that was involved. Comes from my heart. Thank you.
Alfred Murray Jr. evaded the stone walls of a prison cell, but history has branded his name indelibly as a child killer. The files are archived, the storm has passed, and Mary Theresa Simpson, the shy 12-year-old girl with her cat-eye glasses and her Jungle Jay card, can finally rest in unbroken peace. Form your own conclusions. Step into the fog